Welcome back to the channel where we remember the women who once lit up the screen, the stage, and the hearts of millions. In this video, we pay tribute to American female celebrities who tragically lost their lives to heart attacks. Behind the glamour, the red carpets, and the smiling photos were real people, each carrying their own hopes, pressures, and private battles. Some were taken suddenly, without warning, while others had shown signs that were sadly overlooked. A heart attack doesn't always come loudly, it can creep in quietly, and when it hits, it can take everything. These women were more than just stars. They were mothers, daughters, friends, and icons, and their stories remind us how fragile life can be. Today, we honor their final moments, their legacies, and the silent toll that stress, pain, and hidden illness can take on even the brightest lives. Today, we remember Celeste, the graceful and talented American actress whose death on July 15, 2012, marked the end of a long and brilliant journey, but also a deeply painful chapter filled with heartbreak, health struggles, and family conflict. At 95 years old, she passed away in her beloved Central Park West apartment in New York, just 2 days after suffering a heart attack while being treated for dehydration at Roosevelt Hospital. Her final years were marked by physical pain. She endured skin cancer, bleeding ulcers, hip replacements, a collapsed lung, and was living with a pacemaker. But what made those years even more difficult was the legal and emotional turmoil that surrounded her. A brutal family battle over a financial trust set up by her son drained her savings, shattered relationships, and left her relying on Social Security despite a lifetime of achievements. The very apartment she had bought outright from her film earnings in the 1950s became a symbol of the fragile peace she held on to at the end. Her husband, Frank Bossall, 45 years her junior, stayed by her side. But their love story, instead of bringing unity, caused years of painful legal wrangling. Yet before the sadness of her last days, Celeste Holm lived a life most only dream of. Born in Manhattan in 1917 to a Norwegian businessman and a portrait artist, she traveled across Europe as a child, shaped by culture and creativity. She found her calling on the stage early, and by 25, had become a Broadway sensation as the flirtatious Adu Annie in Rodgers and Hammerstein's groundbreaking Oklahoma. Singing the unforgettable I Can't Say No, that role catapulted her to stardom and opened the doors to Hollywood, where she won an Oscar for Gentleman's Agreement in 1947, and was nominated for Come to the Stable 1949 and All About Eve 1950. She shared screen time with legends like Frank Sinatra in High Society, and despite often playing characters who didn't get the guy, she always stole the scene with her wit, warmth, and presence. But even with all the glitz, Celeste's heart belonged to the stage and to public service. She was a passionate mental health advocate, a UNICEF spokesperson, and chair of Arts Horizons. Her kindness extended off-screen too, where she gave her time, her voice, and her love. Married 5 times, with 2 sons and a lifetime of stories, she faced betrayal and loyalty in equal measure. Her strength through personal storms made her as admirable in real life as she was in character. Celeste Holm wasn't just an actress. She was a survivor, a fighter, and someone who brought beauty to this world while quietly enduring pain behind the curtains. In the end, it wasn't just the heart attack that took her. It was years of being worn down by illness and family strife. But what remains is her legacy. A woman who helped shape American theater and film, who gave joy to millions, and whose light still flickers every time someone watches her on screen. Constance, the beautiful and talented American model turned actress whose journey through fame, love, and loss ended far too soon at the age of just 49. Constance died from a sudden heart attack on October 28, 1969, at UCLA Medical Center, leaving behind a husband, 4 children, and a quiet legacy that once lit up stages and screens across 2 continents. Her final years were spent away from the spotlight, working as a guide at the Dolphin Laboratory in the Virgin Islands, living a quiet family life with her husband Ivan Torres, and rarely stepping into the public eye. But decades before that quiet ending, Constance had been the center of attention, first as a bold, hazel-eyed New York teenager lying about her age to dance at nightclubs, then as a rising Broadway star who caught the eye of major producers and even director Leah Kazan. with whom she had a long, emotionally complex affair. Her early charm and stage talent took her to Hollywood in the 1940s, where she was briefly favored by the powerful Samuel Goldwyn, starring alongside Danny Kaye in Up in Arms and opposite Nelson Eddy in Knickerbocker Holiday. She was praised for her beauty and depth, but as quickly as the spotlight came, it faded, Goldwyn moved on, and so did the roles. In the late 40s, Constance tried to revive her career in Italy, becoming one of the first American actresses to work there permanently, appearing in films with stars like Gina Lollobrigida and Vittorio Gassman. But even overseas, her fame never quite matched her potential. After returning to the US, she worked in a few television anthologies and starred in the sci-fi film Gog, written by the man who would later become her husband. With Ivan Tors, she built a family, including 3 sons and an adopted child from Kenya, and she quietly left Hollywood behind. But her past remained marked with sorrow. Her brief romance with the brilliant Italian poet Cesare Pavese ended with his suicide, reportedly broken by her rejection. In later years, tragedy struck again when her son Peter also died of a heart attack in his 40s, echoing the way his mother had passed. Constance Dowling's life was filled with beauty, heartbreak, passion, and quiet sacrifice. She was a dream many chased but few truly knew, a woman whose face graced movie posters, whose name was whispered in poems, and whose final years were far removed from the flashing lights of her youth. Her sudden death from cardiac arrest was a painful reminder of how fragile life can be, even for those who once seemed untouchable. She now rests at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, California, leaving behind a story of talent, loss, love, and the ache of unfulfilled promise. Marion Lorne, the gentle, confused, and deeply lovable Aunt Clara from Bewitched, whose sweet presence warmed television screens in the 1960s, and whose sudden death on May 9, 1968, from a heart attack at the age of 84, left a quiet emptiness in the world of entertainment. She passed away in her New York apartment, just weeks before the Emmy Awards ceremony, where she was honored posthumously for her unforgettable role. A moment made even more emotional as her co-star Elizabeth Montgomery accepted the award on her behalf. In her final months, Marion had been filming the 4th season of Bewitched, delivering her last few episodes with the same charm and kindness she brought to every scene. Her character wasn't just fiction. Marion truly was Aunt Clara, with her real-life collection of antique doorknobs and her soft, scattered way of speaking that made audiences everywhere fall in love with her. But behind that role was a woman with a long and rich history in theater, film, and television. Born on August 12, 1883, in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, Marion began her journey in acting after training at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York. She married playwright Walter Hackett, and the two spent decades working together in London, where they even opened their own theater, the Whitehall, and staged countless successful productions. But when Hackett died in 1944, Marion was left heartbroken, financially struggling, and unsure of what came next. It took her a few quiet years to return to the stage, but she eventually found her way back, proving her strength and love for the craft. She made her film debut late in life, in her 60s, as the smothering mother in Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train. And although Hollywood failed to give her many more film roles, she found her true calling in television. Whether it was Mrs. Gurney on Mr. Peepers or part of the Gary Moore Show, Marion stood out with her fluttery voice, wide-eyed confusion, and innocent heart. Her last and greatest role came as Aunt Clara, a magical woman who always meant well, but whose spells hilariously went wrong, just like real life often does. And though she only appeared in 27 episodes, it felt like she had always been there. She never had children of her own, and was widowed for over 2 decades. But she poured all her energy into the characters she played and the laughter she brought to others. Marion once said she would act until she couldn't stand up anymore. And she did exactly that, working almost until her very last breath. Her passing was quiet, without drama, but deeply felt by those who knew her and by the many who adored her on screen. Today, we look back not just on a career that spanned over 60 years, but on a woman who never stopped bringing joy, even in her final days, and who remains, to this day, one of the most tender and unforgettable faces in television history. Joan Crawford, a woman who once ruled the silver screen and became one of Hollywood's most powerful and unforgettable stars. Joan died on May 10, 1977, alone in her New York apartment from a sudden heart attack. She was 69 years old, though some believe she may have been even older. Just 4 days before her death, she gave away her beloved dog because she was too weak to care for it anymore. A quiet, painful moment that showed how frail she had become. Joan had no known history of heart problems, but in her last years, she had become increasingly withdrawn and reclusive, suffering from back pain and avoiding the spotlight she once thrived in. Her last public appearance was in 1974, and after that, she faded into privacy, no longer the glamorous star with hundreds of people calling her name. But the woman behind the legend had lived a life that was anything but quiet. Born Lucille Fay LeSueur in Texas, Joan's early years were full of struggle. Her father abandoned the family when she was a baby, and her mother's next marriage took them to Oklahoma, where Joan grew up in a vaudeville theater. From childhood, she dreamed of becoming a dancer, but after an injury that required multiple surgeries, she was out of school and away from dancing for over a year. Despite those early setbacks, Joan's determination never faded. She worked as a schoolmaid to pay tuition, suffered harsh treatment from teachers, and even faked her academic records just to survive. Her big break came when she moved into film in the 1920s, starting out as a dancer before landing her iconic role in Our Dancing Daughters in 1928. It made her a star. Through the 1930s, she became one of MGM's biggest names, competing with the likes of Norma Shearer and Greta Garbo. Joan was known for playing strong, hardworking women who rose from nothing, roles that mirrored her own life. But fame came with its costs. By the end of the 30s, her movies stopped making money, and she was cruelly labeled box office poison. But Joan fought back and returned stronger than ever with Mildred Pierce in 1945, a role that won her an Oscar and proved she still had what it took. Her success didn't end there. She went on to star in thrillers, horror films like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and even took on business, joining the Pepsi-Cola board after Marion company president Alfred Steele. After his death, she continued representing Pepsi, touring the world with glamour and strength. But while her public image was polished, her private life was complicated. She married 4 times and adopted 4 children, but her relationship with 2 of them, Christina and Christopher, became infamous. Christina's book Mommy Dearest, released after Joan's death, painted a painful and disturbing picture of life behind closed doors, a story of alleged abuse and control that shocked the world and added a darker layer to Joan's legacy. In her final years, she lived quietly, far from the spotlight she once owned. When she passed away, there was no grand farewell, just a funeral and her ashes placed next to the husband she had loved. Joan Crawford was a woman of grit, glamour, ambition, and deep flaws. She clawed her way from a rough childhood to the top of Hollywood, and then into business and beyond. She was strong, but not unbreakable. Her death from a heart attack may have been sudden, but the loneliness and physical pain that marked her last days make it all the more tragic. In the end, she left behind not just a towering list of film credits, but a story full of brilliance, beauty, hardship, and heartbreak. Peggy Lee, the unforgettable American singer and songwriter whose soft, smoky voice captured hearts across generations, but whose final years were marked by a quiet struggle with failing health. Born Norma Dolores Ekstrom in North Dakota on May 26, 1920, she had a tough childhood. Her mother died when she was only 4, and her stepmother was abusive. Music became her escape, and by her teens, she was already singing on the radio. A local DJ gave her the name Peggy Lee, and from there, her journey into music truly began. She got her big break in 1941 when she was discovered by Benny Goodman and became the lead female vocalist for his band, where she recorded her first major hit, Why Don't You Do Right, and gained national attention. Over the decades, Peggy Lee recorded over 1,100 songs and helped write more than 270 of them. She had hits like Fever, Lover, and The Haunting, Is That All There Is, which won her a Grammy in 1969. She also voiced characters and wrote songs for Disney's Lady and the Tramp. even winning a groundbreaking legal case years later for her rights to its home video profits. Behind her stage presence was a woman who quietly battled illness for many years. In the 1990s, she often performed from a wheelchair, refusing to give up music. After a stroke weakened her voice, she still sang to sold-out crowds, even as she coped with diabetes, heart disease, and pain from years of physical decline. On January 21, 2002, she passed away from a heart attack at her home in Los Angeles at the age of 81. Her daughter was by her side. That heart attack came after years of health battles, including complications from diabetes and a stroke that had left her physically fragile, but still determined to stay close to her music. She left behind not just timeless recordings, but a legacy of resilience, elegance, and quiet strength. Known for her breathy, intimate style, Peggy Lee never shouted to be heard. She sang softly, with deep feeling, and somehow that made people stop and really listen. Her death marked the end of an era, and even now, her songs carry a kind of aching beauty that reminds us how she poured her whole soul into every note. Gertrude "Ma" Rainey, a legendary American blues singer whose powerful voice and fearless spirit shaped the sound of a generation, and whose life ended quietly on December 22, 1939, after suffering a fatal heart attack in her hometown of Columbus, Georgia. She was only 53 when her heart gave out, and though she had largely stepped away from the spotlight by then, the pain of her loss still lingers deeply in the history of American music. Known as the Mother of the Blues, Ma Rainey wasn't just a singer. She was a force of nature who poured her truth into every song, blending the raw emotion of Southern black life with a show-stopping stage presence that demanded attention. In her final years, long after her touring days had ended, she ran 2 theaters in Georgia, living a quieter life. But the fire she lit in the world of music never dimmed. Her death came at a time when the music industry was moving in new directions, and while many had begun to forget her name, those who truly knew the blues never stopped feeling her impact. Born in either Georgia or Alabama in the 1880s, Ma's exact birth date remains uncertain, but what's clear is that from a young age, she was destined to sing. At just 14, she began performing in minstrel and vaudeville shows, and after marrying fellow performer Will "Pa" Rainey, she became Ma Rainey, a name that would change music forever. She sang about love, loss, freedom, and pain in a voice so deep and strong it could shake a room, and her songs often told stories other women were too afraid to say out loud. With gold teeth, bold jewelry, and a fierce confidence, she claimed the stage with songs like Boll Weevil Blues and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, recording more than 100 tracks between 1923 and 1928 and collaborating with icons like Louis Armstrong and Thomas Dorsey. She mentored Bessie Smith, who would later become the Empress of the Blues, and helped usher blues music into the mainstream. Ma Rainey also lived her truth offstage, never hiding her love for women in a time when being open about her sexuality came with heavy risks. Her lyrics were brave, her style was bold, and her legacy was built not just on talent but on honesty. She knew the struggles of black performers during her time, dealing with racism, exploitation, and a world that rarely offered respect. And yet she stood tall, singing for those who couldn't. In her last years, as the blues scene faded from the spotlight and modern music took over, Ma didn't chase trends. She stepped away with dignity, returning to Georgia, where she died in the very town where her journey began. Her death was quiet, but her influence has never stopped growing. Decades later, she would be honored with a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, and her life would be portrayed in the film Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, reminding new generations who she was and what she meant. Ma Rainey wasn't just a singer, she was a voice for the unheard, a truth teller, and a woman who lived on her own terms, right to the end. Mickey Wright, one of the greatest legends in women's golf history, who passed away on February 17, 2020, at the age of 85 after suffering a heart attack, just weeks after being hospitalized from a fall. Her final days spent away from the golf course that once defined her life. Her death quietly ended a chapter of dominance, grace, and unmatched talent that changed the game forever. Born Mary Catherine Wright on Valentine's Day in 1935 in San Diego, She was nicknamed Mickey early on and grew up battling insecurities about her height and size. Teased at school, she turned those feelings into fuel and found purpose in golf, thanks to her father who introduced her to the sport at just 9 years old. By the time she was a teenager, she was outscoring local professionals, and before long, she had made a name for herself across the country. She won the U.S. Girls Junior Championship in 1952 and the World Amateur in 1954 before turning pro later that year. Once on the LPGA Tour, Mickey didn't just compete, she ruled it. Between 1955 and 1969, she won 82 LPGA tournaments, including 13 major championships, a record that only a few in the sport have come close to. Her swing was often called the best in the world, praised by icons like Ben Hogan and admired by every player who came after her. In 1963 alone, she won 13 tournaments, still the most ever in a single LPGA season. Her power was unbelievable. She could hit 270-yard drives and once overshot a 385-yard hole. But behind the victories was a woman who pushed through pain. By age 34, constant issues with her feet and back forced her to step away from full-time competition. She never chased fame, and after retirement, she preferred a quiet life in Florida, staying away from the spotlight even as her legacy continued to grow. Mickey was inducted into the LPGA Hall of Fame in 1964 and later into the World Golf Hall of Fame. She survived breast cancer, overcame decades of physical challenges, and lived long enough to see generations of women inspired by her name. Her final years were quieter, spent away from cameras, but her impact never faded. The same woman who once laid out courses, set pins, and still found time to win now rests, leaving behind a record that tells a story of power, discipline, and unmatched greatness. Mickey Wright didn't just play golf, she changed it forever. Geraldine Page, one of the most gifted and emotionally powerful actresses in American history, whose sudden and heartbreaking death shook the entire theater and film community. On June 13, 1987, Geraldine didn't show up for her Broadway performances of Blythe Spirit, and by the end of that evening, it was confirmed she had died alone in her Manhattan townhouse from a heart attack at the age of 62. Just days earlier, she had been lighting up the stage with the same raw intensity that made her a legend, and her passing came without warning, leaving everyone, her family, friends, fellow actors, and lifelong fans, completely devastated. Her final days weren't marked by illness or retirement, but by dedication and passion, as she continued to pour her heart into her work, never slowing down, even when her body was quietly giving out. Born in Missouri on November 22, 1924, Geraldine was raised in Chicago, where her love for acting began in church plays. She once dreamed of being a painter or pianist, but from the moment she stepped on stage as a teenager, she knew acting was her true calling. She studied drama seriously, learned from some of the greatest names like U.T.A. Hagen and Lee Strasberg, and worked odd jobs to survive while chasing her dream. Geraldine was known for being endlessly versatile, able to disappear into her roles, whether it was on stage, on television, or on the big screen. Her career was filled with highs and hurdles. She was even blacklisted during the McCarthy era for years, but she never gave up. She earned 8 Oscar nominations and finally won one for The Trip to Bountiful in 1985, playing an elderly woman longing to return to her childhood home, a performance that felt hauntingly close to her own sense of nostalgia and vulnerability. She also earned 2 Emmy Awards, 2 Golden Globes, and multiple Tony nominations, and was praised for bringing deep, often painful honesty to every role she played. Offstage, Geraldine lived through her own struggles. Her marriage to actor Rip Torn endured even after they began living apart. And though her personal life was far from perfect, there was always a quiet strength in how she handled things, never seeking the spotlight, never chasing fame. She simply wanted to be good at something, and she became one of the greatest actresses of her time. Her death, coming so suddenly while she was still working and performing, was a harsh reminder of how fragile life is. Geraldine Page didn't fade away or step back from the world. She gave her all to the very end. Her legacy lives on through the unforgettable characters she brought to life and the deep humanity she shared with the world. J. Madison Wright Morris, a young woman whose life was filled with talent, strength, and heartbreaking twists that no one should ever have to face so early. Madison was only 21 years old when she died suddenly of a heart attack on July 21, 2006, just 2 weeks after marrying the love of her life, Brent Joseph Morris, and only days before she was supposed to start her first job as an English teacher at George Rogers Clark High School. What makes her story even more painful is that she had already fought so hard to stay alive. As a teenager, she was diagnosed with restrictive cardiomyopathy, a rare and serious condition that damages the heart muscles. And at just 15 years old, she received a life-saving heart transplant at the Cleveland Clinic. That transplant gave her 6 more years she didn't waste. She shared her story to raise awareness about organ donation, studied hard, earned her degree, and was ready to begin a new chapter as a teacher, with so much love and hope in her heart. Madison was born on July 29, 1984, in Cincinnati, Ohio, and grew up in Kentucky, where she was the oldest of 4 siblings. From a young age, she had a spark that couldn't be ignored, modeling at 5, acting in commercials, and then landing major TV roles after her family moved to Los Angeles to support her dreams. She found fame at just 10 years old in the sci-fi series Earth 2 and later appeared in an Emmy-nominated episode of where her performance as a dying child was the first time the show depicted the death of a child. She also starred in the family film Shiloh alongside her little sister, and appeared in several TV movies before stepping away from acting in her teens. Madison was more than just a child star. She was someone who had lived through pain most people can't imagine and still chose to live with grace, compassion, and hope. After surviving countless hospital stays, a serious heart condition, and a transplant, she found happiness again in love and was ready to start her adult life. But just one day after returning from her honeymoon in Hawaii, she collapsed from a sudden heart attack and never recovered. Her funeral was held in the same Kentucky church where she had just celebrated her wedding. It's hard to find the right words for a loss like this. Madison's life was far too short, but she made a deep impact through her talent, her bravery, and her kind heart. She was someone who inspired others just by being herself, a fighter, a dreamer, and someone who never stopped hoping for more, even after everything she had been through. Gilly Coleman, a beloved English actress whose sudden death left her fans, friends, and family heartbroken. Gilly passed away on July 13, 2010, at just 54 years old, from a suspected heart attack while visiting her mother's grave, only weeks before she was scheduled to receive a pacemaker that could have saved her life. She had lived with a serious heart condition, and tragically, her body gave out before she could get the help she needed. Born on September 13, 1955, in Liverpool, Gilly was raised in a theatrical home where her parents ran a ballroom dance school. From a young age, she had a spark for the stage and joined the Shella Elliott Clark Drama School at just 8 years old. Her passion and drive led to early work in commercials and stage plays, and by the late 1970s, she had broken into television with appearances in Coronation Street and later Emmerdale, Brookside, Open All Hours, Inspector Morse, and more. But Gilly's most iconic role came in 1986 when she played the quirky, red-haired, high-heel-loving Avellini in the hit BBC sitcom Brad. The show, set in Liverpool during tough economic times, followed the Boswell family and struck a deep chord with viewers across Britain. Gilly's portrayal of Avellini, a ditzy but lovable aspiring model constantly watched over by her overprotective mother and brothers, made her one of the most unforgettable characters in British comedy. When Avellini married Oswald, a Protestant vicar, in 1988, over 21 million people tuned in to watch. That role made her a household name. After 5 seasons, she left the show in 1989 to have her first child, choosing to put her family first. Gilly continued acting in various dramas, and even won praise for her powerful performance in the true story-based BBC film Snatched, but eventually retired in 2000 to focus fully on raising her 4 children with her husband, Phil Cutts. She always planned to return to acting once her youngest finished school, but fate didn't allow it. The fact that she died while quietly visiting her mom's grave on her own time, without fanfare, makes her passing even more heartbreaking. She was someone who lit up the screen not because she was flashy, but because she was real. She had a warm, natural charm and a comic touch that was all her own. Gilly Coleman wasn't just a talented actress. She was a devoted mother, a loyal friend, and someone who truly gave her all to whatever she did. Her sudden death was a painful reminder that life can be so fragile, even for someone who brought so much laughter and joy to others. She is deeply missed, but her legacy lives on in the memories of those who loved her and in the laughter she gave to millions.